Long ago, the Roman Empire was the most powerful civilization on Earth. Today, the United States of America is the most powerful nation on the planet. The Romans built roads, aqueducts, and grand buildings that still stand today. They created laws, art, and a culture that influenced the world for centuries. America has the strongest military, a thriving economy, and a culture that reaches every corner of the globe. Like Rome, America has built great cities, created laws that many other countries follow, and has a way of life that many cultures admire. But Rome didn't stay powerful forever. Over time, the Roman Empire began to weaken. It faced problems that it could not solve. Eventually, Rome fell. Its government collapsed, and the empire that had lasted for centuries came to an end. Could the same thing happen to the United States? I'm going to give many examples of why the US empire mirrors the Roman Empire, and why this could lead to its eventual downfall. Rome struggled with political problems. There were arguments and fights over who should be in charge. Leaders often cared more about their own power than what was good for the empire. The government became corrupt, with officials taking bribes and making decisions that helped themselves rather than the people they govern. In the United States, we see a country that is also divided. Political arguments have become more intense, and it feels like our leaders are more interested in winning than working together. Trust in the government is low, and many people believe that the system is no longer working for them. Just like in Rome, this political instability could make it harder for the country to solve its many problems. In the final centuries of the Roman Empire, corruption became rampant. Senators and officials who were supposed to serve the people instead served themselves. They took bribes, embezzled public funds, and made decisions that favored the wealthy elite over the common citizen. This widespread corruption eroded trust in the government and contributed to the empire's eventual downfall. In the United States, corruption is also a growing concern. From lobbying and the revolving door between government and industry to political scandals that shake public trust, corruption undermines the very principles that the country was founded on. One recent example is the scandal involving U.S. Senator Richard Burr, who was investigated for insider trading after selling stocks in early 2020, just before the coronavirus pandemic caused the market to crash. This case highlighted concerns about lawmakers using their positions for personal gain. Additionally, the influence of big money in politics, such as the millions of dollars spent by corporate lobbyists to shape legislation in their favor, has further eroded trust in the political system. The Citizens United ruling in 2010, which allowed unlimited corporate spending in elections, has been criticized for increasing the power of wealthy donors and special interest groups over the democratic process. When elected officials prioritize their own interest or those of their wealthy donors over the needs of the people, it weakens democracy and fuels cynicism among the public. Like Rome, the US risks falling into a trap where corruption corrodes the foundations of the state, leading to a loss of faith in institutions and ultimately decline. A recent example of America's division is the events of January 6, 2021, when the US Capitol was stormed by a mob. This event shocked the world and showed just how deep the divisions in America have become. It wasn't just an attack on a building, it was an attack on the very idea of peaceful governance. The riot revealed how fragile democracy can be when trust erodes and people are pushed to the brink. Just as Rome faced internal power struggles that weakened its ability to govern, the United States is now grappling with its own crisis of confidence. The way the United States handled its COVID-19 pandemic further exposes its vulnerabilities. The pandemic was a test of leadership, resilience, and unity, and it revealed deep cracks in the system. While other nations managed to control the virus with coordinated responses, the US struggled with inconsistent policies, political infighting, and a lack of clear communication. The result was one of the highest death tolls in the world and an economy that suffered greatly. Like Rome, which was weakened by plagues and internal disarray, the US has shown that it is not invincible in the face of global crisis. The Roman economy was once strong, but it began to crumble over time. The empire spent too much money on wars and luxuries, and it became harder to collect enough taxes to pay for everything. Inflation, meaning that money became less valuable, made it difficult for ordinary people to afford what they needed. The gap between the rich and the poor grew wide. In America, we see some similar problems. The national debt is growing, and there are worries about how the country will pay it back. The US national debt now exceeds $30 trillion, a figure so large it's hard to even imagine. This debt is like a ticking time bomb, one that could go off if the government can't find a way to manage it. Interest payments on this debt are taking up more and more of the federal budget, leaving less money for other important needs like education, infrastructure, and healthcare. The 2008 financial crisis was a wake-up call for many Americans. It showed just how fragile the economy could be. Banks that were too big to fail needed massive bailouts from the government, and millions of people lost their homes and jobs. This crisis exposed deep flaws in the American financial system, much like economic problems that began to surface in the later years of the Roman Empire. Since then, the recovery has been uneven, with the richest Americans growing even richer while many others still struggle to make ends meet. 1% of the US population holds 90% of the wealth. Today, inflation is rising at a rate not seen in decades, making everyday goods more expensive for everyone. The cost of groceries, gas, and housing has gone up sharply, while wages have not kept pace. Many Americans are finding that their paychecks just don't stretch as far as they used to. This situation is similar to what Rome experienced in its later years, when inflation and economic mismanagement made life difficult for ordinary citizens. If these trends continue, they can lead to widespread discontent and weaken the social fabric of the nation. Buying a home, once considered a cornerstone of the American dream, has become increasingly out of reach for many people. Housing prices have skyrocketed, driven by low inventory, high demand, and speculation by investors. In some cities, the cost of buying a home has more than doubled in recent years. This housing crisis is reminiscent of Rome's later years, when economic inequalities made it difficult for ordinary citizens to secure stable housing. As more people are priced out of the market, the dream of home ownership becomes a distant reality, deepening economic divides. The US dollar has long been the world's reserve currency, a symbol of American economic strength. But in recent years, there has been talk of the US dollar losing its value. As the national debt grows and other countries explore alternatives like cryptocurrencies or China's digital yen, the dollar's dominance could be at risk. If the dollar were to be devalued, it would not only make imports more expensive, but could also lead to a loss of global influence. Rome, too, experienced the devaluation of its currency in its later years, a sign of its declining economic power. Rome had a strong army that protected its borders and kept the peace. But as the empire expanded, it became harder to defend all that territory. The Roman military was stretched too thin, and they had to hire soldiers from other lands who were not always loyal. Eventually, these problems made it impossible to protect the empire from invaders. The United States also has the largest military, which is stationed all around the world. From Europe to the Middle East and from Asia to Africa, US troops are involved in countless missions aimed at maintaining global stability. But this global presence is expensive and is becoming harder to justify the cost. In 2023, the United States spent $916 billion on its military, which was over 40% of the world's total military spending. This was 13.3% of the US federal budget and 3.5% of the US gross domestic product. The US spends more than the next 10 countries combined, yet it still faces significant challenges. Rising powers like China are rapidly modernizing their own militaries, and conflicts in places like the South China Sea are testing America's ability to respond. The recent withdrawal from Afghanistan is a stark reminder of the limits of American power. After 20 years of war, the US left behind a country that quickly fell back into the hands of the enemy. The images of chaos at Kabul airport were broadcast around the world, and they raised serious questions about America's ability to maintain its global influence. Like Rome, the US may be reaching a point where it is trying to do too much with too few resources. Meanwhile, the world is watching as Russia wages war in Ukraine, a conflict that has far-reaching consequences. The United States, along with its allies, has imposed sanctions on Russia and provided support to Ukraine, but the situation remains tense. This conflict has not only brought back memories of Cold War tensions, but also tested the strength of international alliances. Just as Rome faced challenges from external powers that sought to exploit its weaknesses, the US is now navigating a complex and dangerous global landscape where old rivals are becoming more aggressive. In Rome's later years, the empire struggled to maintain the infrastructure that had once been the envy of the world. Roads that connected the farthest reaches of the empire fell into disrepair. Aqueducts that brought fresh water to the cities began to crumble. Without the means to repair and maintain these vital structures, the quality of life for many Roman citizens deteriorated, and the empire's ability to sustain its population was severely weakened. Today, the United States faces a similar challenge. Across the country, critical infrastructure is weakening and failing. The American Society of Civil Engineers has repeatedly given the US a low grade for its infrastructure, warning that roads, bridges, and water systems are in desperate need of repair. In 2021, the collapse of the Fern Hollow Bridge in Pittsburgh made national headlines, underscoring the urgency of the problem. The bridge's failure, which resulted in injuries and disrupted a major transportation route, was a stark reminder of the dangers posed by aging infrastructure. Also, the water crisis in Flint, Michigan, where residents were exposed to lead-contaminated water due to the failure of an aging water system, highlighted the severe consequences of neglecting essential infrastructure. Despite these warnings, funding for infrastructure projects often gets caught up in political battles, leading to delays and further decay. Just as Rome's crumbling infrastructure contributed to its decline, the US risks weakening its own foundations if it doesn't act soon. In Rome, people began to lose their sense of duty to the empire. They became more interested in luxury and entertainment than in working hard and supporting their community. As more people focused on their own pleasures, the bonds that held Roman society together started to break down. In the US, some people see a similar trend. Consumerism, where people focus on buying and owning things, is at its peak. The average American is bombarded with thousands of ads every day, encouraging them to spend money on the latest gadgets, clothes, and cars. Social media plays a big role in this, with influencers showing off their luxurious lifestyles and creating a culture of envy and competition. At the same time, American society is becoming more divided. Racial tensions, economic disparities, and ideological differences are driving people apart. Social media often makes these divisions worse, creating echo chambers where people only hear opinions that agree with their own. As an example, the woke mentality touches on deeply held beliefs and values related to identity, culture, and power. It highlights the broader cultural and political polarization in the country, with each side often viewing the other as not just wrong, but as a threat to their way of life. Just as Rome's social cohesion weakened over time, America's sense of unity is being tested. Rome was also under constant pressure from outside forces. Germanic tribes, Huns, and other groups saw Rome's weakness and began to invade. The empire could no longer defend its borders, and these invasions played a big role in its collapse. Today, the United States faces challenges from other countries like China and Russia. These nations are not only competing economically, but also testing America's strength in other areas like cybersecurity and military power. Cyber attacks from state-sponsored hackers have targeted everything from government agencies to critical infrastructure, causing widespread disruption and panic. The recent ransomware attacks that shut down a major oil pipeline and several meatpacking plants are just the beginning of this new kind of digital warfare. Economic competition is also heating up. The trade war with China has shown just how interconnected and fragile the global economy can be.
We can't continue to allow China to rape our country.
Tariffs on steel and aluminium imports.
China has announced it's retaliating for the tariff.
The U.S. trade war with China is on hold.
China has filed a complaint with the World Trade Organization.
Tariffs and counter-tariffs have hurt businesses on both sides, and there are fears that this could lead to a longer-term economic conflict. Meanwhile, China's Belt and Road Initiative is spreading Chinese influence across Asia, Africa, and Europe, challenging the US for economic dominance in key regions. In the later years of the Roman Republic, Rome faced a significant decline in birth rates among its citizens. This demographic crisis concerned many leaders, including Julius Caesar, who recognized that a shrinking population could weaken the empire's ability to sustain its military, economy, and cultural influence. To address this, Caesar introduced laws that offered incentives to families who had 3 children or more. These measures were designed to encourage larger families and ensure the empire's continued growth and stability. Today, the United States is experiencing a similar challenge. The birth rate in America has been steadily declining, reaching historic lows. Many young couples are choosing to have fewer children, or none at all, citing financial concerns as one of the primary reasons. The cost of raising a child in the US has skyrocketed, with expenses like healthcare, housing, education, and childcare placing immense pressure on families. The average cost of raising a child to the age of 18 in the US is estimated to be over $230,000, not including college tuition. With stagnant wages, rising housing costs, and the burden of student loan debt, many Americans find it increasingly difficult to afford more children. This economic strain, coupled with the lack of sufficient parental leave policies and affordable childcare, discourages larger families and contributes to the declining birth rates. Just as Julius Caesar understood the importance of a stable population for the future of Rome, the US must grapple with long-term implications of its declining birth rates. A shrinking population could lead to a smaller workforce, reduced economic growth, and increased pressure on social security systems. If left unaddressed, these trends could weaken the very foundation of the nation, much like what happened in Rome. In both cases, the decline in birth rates reflects deeper societal challenges that, if not resolved, could contribute to the decline of the US empire. The story of Rome is a story of rise and fall. It teaches us that even the greatest empires are not invincible. They can be weakened from within by political struggles, economic problems, and social decay, and they can be threatened from without by new and powerful rivals. The question we must ask ourselves is, can the United States learn from Rome's mistakes, or are we doomed to repeat them? Some say America is too big to fall, but America is much like the Titanic. Too big to turn, too slow to react, too proud to recognize we already hit the iceberg. And above all else, there are not enough lifeboats for everyone. History has shown us that even the mightiest empires can fall, but America's future is not set in stone. The United States still has the power to change its course, to address its challenges, and to remain strong. But to do so, it must recognize the lessons of history. It must find a way to unite its people, strengthen its economy, rid itself of corruption, and protect its place in the world. Only by doing this can the US avoid the same fate that befell Rome.